Okay, so picture this 1920s Paris, right? A woman sells a painting, and then instead of, reinvesting or paying bills or whatever, she just walks right into a Cartier and buys herself a diamond bracelet.
That's Tamara de Lempicka for you.
That's Tamara de Lempicka.
A life that really just blended art ambition and just like oodles and oodles of glamour.
It's a fantastic story, and that's what we're diving into today, the life and work of Tamara de Lempicka, the Polish artist who became, an Art Deco icon.
Yeah, and we're going to be basing our deep dive on the Stuff You Missed in History Class podcast episode on her life.
And believe me, you'll want to stick around because this one is full of twists and turns.
I do want to give a little content note to our listeners. There is a brief mention of domestic violence a little bit later in the episode, so if that's something you want to skip ahead a few minutes, feel free.
Thanks for that heads up. Now, let's start at the beginning. Tamara de Lempicka's early life is actually a bit of a mystery.
It is.
She claimed to be born in 1898, but evidence suggests it was likely 1894. Even her first name has multiple variations in the records.
It's true. It seems like she cultivated this, air of mystery.
Right, from the get-go.
Yeah, from a young age. But what we do know is that she came from a very wealthy family, and she traveled extensively with her grandmother.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine, being exposed to the grand museums and the cultural capitals of Europe as a child?
Yeah.
So it's no surprise that she developed this deep passion for art.
And then in her late teens, she married Tadeusz Lempicki. He was a lawyer, not an artist.
Right.
And they started their life together in St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
But this period of, relative stability was totally shattered by the Russian Revolution.
Yeah, the revolution really just turned their lives completely upside down. I mean, imagine this Tadeusz is arrested in the dead of night.
Oh my gosh.
And Tamara has no idea why.
Wow.
And she's frantically searching for him, going from prison to prison.
I can't even imagine the terror and uncertainty of that time, not knowing what happened to your loved one.
It's wild.
So how did she escape that situation?
Well, she shows incredible resourcefulness and courage. She manages to flee to Copenhagen with the help of the Swedish consul.
Wow.
Eventually, they were reunited in Paris, but they had to start over with very little.
So they land in Paris, the city that is just, brimming with artists and creativity. But they are facing some serious financial hardship. And it's at this point that Tamara really turns to art, not just as a passion, but as a means of survival.
Yeah, it's fascinating how sometimes limitations can just spark incredible creativity.
Yeah.
She enrolls in art school, she's studying with some very prominent artists, but always with this determination to stand out. She even added the day to her name.
Interesting.
Very consciously crafting a more sophisticated artistic persona.
It sounds like she understood the power of branding even back then.
Oh, absolutely. She was so savvy. And remember those diamond bracelets?
Oh, yeah.
She wasn't just indulging in luxury, she was investing in her future.
Wow.
Creating the safety net in a world that was not always kind to women.
Especially back then.
Let alone women artists. There's a quote that I think just perfectly captures her ambition. I decided I was going to become the most important painter in Paris.
And from what we know of her life, she really went after that goal with incredible determination.
She did.
Now, to understand her success, we need to talk about her unique style.
Right.
It was something totally different from what was happening in the Parisian art scene at the time.
Yeah, it's true. She described her style as clean and precise.
Okay.
Which, might sound kind of simple, but remember, this is the era of Art Deco.
Right.
This movement that's defined by geometric shapes, bold lines, and that sleek machine-age aesthetic.
Right.
And Tamara's paintings, they fit right into that world, but they also bring something new, a sense of strength and confidence, particularly in her portraits of women.
You see that confidence radiating from her self-portrait in the green Bugatti.
Yes.
It's such a powerful image of a woman in control, but there's also this fascinating layer of constructed image there too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The green Bugatti, for example. She didn't actually own one. She posed with a rented car for the portrait. It was all very deliberate, very carefully crafted to create this persona that embodied the modern liberated woman of the 1920s.
So she's a talented artist, a savvy businesswoman, and a master of self-promotion.
Yes.
But what about the woman behind the carefully constructed image? Her personal life seems to have been just as captivating as her art, maybe even scandalous for the time.
Yes. Her personal life was anything but conventional. She hosted lavish parties, had numerous affairs with both men and women.
Wow.
And her relationship with her daughter Cosette was incredibly complex.
Before we, delve into the complexities of her personal life, I just want to take a moment to appreciate the audacity of a woman living so openly and independently in that era.
It's a good point. It's easy to forget just how groundbreaking her lifestyle was.
Yeah.
She was challenging societal norms, embracing her sexuality, and just living life on her own terms. And she really captured that spirit in her art.
That famous quote, "I live life in the margins of society and the rules of normal society don't apply in the margins," really speaks volumes.
Yeah, it does.
But let's talk more about those affairs. They seem to be a recurring theme in her life, and often they were intertwined with her art.
That's right. Many of her lovers, both men and women, ended up as subjects in her paintings.
Oh, wow.
And some of those paintings led to some pretty dramatic turns in her life, like her second marriage.
Okay, so how does a painting lead to a marriage?
Well, in the late 1920s, Tamara was commissioned to paint a portrait of the Baron Raoul Kufner's mistress.
Hmm, interesting.
The Baron was this wealthy Hungarian aristocrat
Okay.
and a huge admirer of her work.
So she's painting this portrait of this woman, and then what, she runs off with the Baron?
Not quite. The story's a little more nuanced than that. Tamara wasn't actually very inspired by the Baron's mistress, and the resulting portrait wasn't exactly flattering. But shortly after it was finished, they began an affair.
Oh, wow.
And that eventually led to their marriage in 1934.
So it's like she painted her rival right out of the picture.
Right. It really adds another layer to that portrait, doesn't it? It makes you wonder if she was already kind of captivated by the Baron while she was painting his mistress.
Fascinating. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about her artistic evolution. We've been talking about these glamorous portraits and the Art Deco influence, but her work wasn't static. How did her style and subject matter change over time?
Well, one of the most significant turning points was the Great Depression.
Of course.
That world of carefree indulgence that she depicted in her earlier work was no longer a reality for so many people.
Right.
And her paintings from this period, they become darker, more introspective.
You can really see that shift in her 1935 painting, Beggar with Mandolin. It's such a departure from those vibrant portraits of women in these luxurious settings.
Exactly. Beggar with Mandolin is a very somber piece, almost monochromatic.
Wow.
The subject is this older man. His face is just etched with hardship.
Mm.
And it's such a stark reminder of those economic realities that were impacting people across the globe.
It's almost like she's acknowledging the world outside her glamorous bubble.
Yeah, and then just a few years later, she and the Baron, they leave Europe for America as World War II is looming on the horizon. It makes you wonder if she was seeking refuge from all the political and social turmoil that was engulfing Europe.
I mean, it's certainly possible. They settled in Connecticut, and she continued to paint and exhibit her work in the U.S., but her style kept evolving.
It did. She even experimented with abstract art, but it wasn't as well received as her earlier work.
It's fascinating how an artist's success can be so intertwined with, the cultural and historical context of their time.
Yeah, and it makes you think about how our tastes as a society change.
Right.
And how artists either adapt or get left behind.
What about her personal life during these later years? Did her relationship with her daughter Cosette ever improve?
Unfortunately, it seems like it remained pretty complicated.
Hmm.
Even though she used Cosette as a model in many of her paintings, there was still this distance between them.
Yeah.
Tamara often prioritized her art over her role as a mother, and that clearly had a lasting impact on Cosette.
It's sad to think that even with all the glamour and success, there was this underlying tension in her personal life. Did she ever find peace or contentment in her later years?
It's hard to say. She became much more reclusive after her husband died in 1962. She even moved to Mexico in her final years, maybe seeking a quieter life away from the spotlight.
It's almost as if she was retreating back into the margins of society, just like she described in that earlier quote.
Right. But even in her seclusion, she never stopped painting.
That's the thing about true artists, right? Their passion for creation never really dies.
It doesn't. And despite all the ups and downs of her career, her later years did see a little glimmer of renewed interest in her work. There was this retrospective exhibition in Paris in 1972 that rekindled some of the recognition that she had enjoyed in her prime.
It's interesting how an artist's legacy can kind of ebb and flow over time. Sometimes it takes a fresh perspective or a new generation of art enthusiasts to rediscover and appreciate work that might have been overlooked in the past.
That's definitely the case with Tamara de Lempicka. She died in 1980, but her story doesn't end there. In fact, her legacy has experienced a pretty remarkable revival in recent years.
So what sparked this revival? Was it a particular exhibition or the rediscovery of some lost masterpiece?
Well, there were a few key events that really brought her back into the limelight. You know, that portrait of Mrs. Joan Jeffrey Bush we talked about earlier, the one that was supposedly lost for decades.
Right.
Well, it resurfaced in the 1980s,
Oh, wow.
and it was sold at auction for millions.
Really?
And that sale really put her name back on the map.
It's amazing how a single artwork can, like, reignite interest in an artist's whole body of work.
It's true. And then in 2009, one of her most famous paintings, La Musicienne, it was stolen from a Dutch museum.
Oh, no.
It was a huge high-profile theft that really captured the public's imagination.
And then was it ever recovered?
Yes, thankfully. A private investigator actually tracked it down a few years later.
Oh.
And it was eventually sold at auction in 2018 for a staggering $9 million.
$9 million. That's incredible. That's a real testament to her enduring appeal.
Absolutely. And her influence extends beyond the art world, too. You know, celebrities like Madonna have long been admirers of her work.
Oh, yeah.
They've incorporated her imagery into music videos and stage shows.
Wow.
And even fashion designers like Giorgio Armani have drawn inspiration from her bold style and her Art Deco sensibility.
It's incredible how her work continues to resonate across different creative fields.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that not all the modern critics have been entirely positive about her art. What are some of the critiques that have been leveled against her?
Well, some critics argue that her work, while technically brilliant, can sometimes feel emotionally detached. They point out that she often focused on portraying a world of wealth and privilege,
Right.
which might feel a little out of touch with contemporary sensibilities.
That's a valid point. It's important to view art through the lens of its time, but also to acknowledge the potential blind spots of the artist.
Exactly. It's a reminder that art is always a product of its social and historical context.
Right. And it's up to us as viewers to engage with those complexities and draw our own conclusions.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the life and work of Tamara de Lempicka, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from this episode?
I think it's the importance of looking beyond the surface, delving deeper into the stories behind the art that we admire. Tamara de Lempicka's life was just this whirlwind of ambition, glamour, and controversy.
It really was.
Her paintings are a window into a fascinating era, but they also raise these timeless questions about identity, creativity, and the price of fame.
It's been a captivating journey exploring the life and legacy of this complex and enigmatic artist.
It has.
We've seen how she defied conventions, built a successful career in a male-dominated field, and created art that continues to captivate audiences even today. If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, there's a wealth of information available online and in libraries. I highly recommend checking out Passion by Design, the biography written by her daughter Cosette, for a more personal perspective on her life.
That's a great one. And remember, every piece of art has a story waiting to be uncovered. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and you'll find that the world is full of fascinating deep dives just waiting to be discovered.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Tamara de Lempicka. Until next time, stay curious.